subscribe.
Popcorn therapy. Holistic health and wellness through the lens of pop culture. This is a show where we take a dip, sometimes shallow, sometimes deep, into the archetypes, symbols, mythologies, systems, and implications of whatever movie or TV show I am watching this week.
Hi everybody, and welcome back to Popcorn Therapy. We're going to be talking about The Substance today, and I have Emilee Nimetz back with me to discuss this movie. I have a bit of a cold, so forgive my raspy voice, and I will edit out the coughing if I need to. And yeah, so welcome, Emilee. Do you want to introduce yourself in any way? Introduce your thoughts about the movie?
Sure. Hello, my name's Emilee Nimetz. I use they, them pronouns. I saw this movie back when it was I think the opening weekend that it came to theaters. I was aware of it because of its, the waves that it made in the festival circuit, and had just heard a lot about it leading up to it, so I was really intrigued. I basically knew nothing about it other than it was kind of advertised as a body horror film starring Demi and Margaret. Qualley, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it. And yeah, I saw it in the movies with a friend, and it was such a thrilling experience to see in a group of people, on a big screen. Everybody's reactions were huge. It was amazing. And yeah, I instantly became obsessed with it. And I think that I texted you, as the credits were rolling, being you need to watch this movie. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're not the only friend that did that. I had a couple other people being please do a podcast about The Substance. Okay, so the plot, the recap of the plot is that we've got Demi Moore, who is Elizabeth Sparkles, and she is this highly acclaimed actress who now is the star of a Jane Fonda-style aerobics show. And because she turns 50, she gets fired. Essentially this idea that, you've aged out, you're no longer sexy, you've expired, so goodbye. And then she's in a car crash, and then at the hospital, this unearthly, beautiful young man gives her this USB in a piece of paper. And then she watches it, and it's this very odd advertisement for The Substance. And sometimes watching the movie, you feel like you're kind of watching the advertisement itself. It's very the whole thing is very branded somehow, which is, I think that's very interesting. And so she goes ahead and gets The Substance without Googling it, which was one of the moments I was like, what era are we in? What, all the cars look kind of 70s, 80s. It was... The whole mode of the movie is very dream or nightmare-like. It's quite removed from reality, which I think was intentional. But you're kind of, she just decides to do... I think she gets drunk and she's like, I'm going for it. And so she goes into this odd little, what would you call that? She has to go through this kind of broken door where she has to hunch down to kind of get through it. And there are these little lock boxes in there, and they give you The Substance. Now, if you have a fear of needles, you're going to have a real hard time with this movie, because especially in the first part, there's needle after needle after needle, close up needles going through skin over and over. And so she takes The Substance, and what it does is it causes her body to birth from her spine a younger, hotter clone of herself, which then lives for a week, and then they switch bodies, and the original lives for a week, and they're supposed to switch every week. So predictably, they do not follow this rule, and, chaos ensues. And the ending, I have to say, I loved. It was so wildly over the top.
Yeah.
I will also say, I watched it on Mubi. I think Mubi has got the rights to The Substance, so I'm not sure if it's going to be coming to any other streaming services. You can do your free trial. They have a yearly price or a monthly price or whatever it is. I'm not totally sure what else is on there, but that's how I watched it. So I watched it from home with my husband, who as we were going through, there was a moment where I actually started gagging. It was so disgusting. It was just one of my little gag trigger things happened. And I was just like, oh God, I need a second, pause it. And my husband was making fun of me for this. And then later on, there was a part that he didn't start gagging, but he actually got up and he was like, I'm done. I can't watch any more of this. And I was like, you sit your butt back down. We have 10 minutes left. We're going to watch this. Like, what's going on with you? You can't get away with that. So I forced him to watch to the end. And I'll get back to our different reactions, because in some ways I feel like this movie was for me and against him. Like, so I think there's a way of looking at it that's like, it is so subversive against the male gaze and all that stuff. So I think he was disturbed in a different way from how I was disturbed, because it's also for me as like, a woman who's aging and facing, all of that stuff. So I think it makes sense that we would have had different reactions just from our different lived experiences. Mm-hmm. So maybe I'll come back to that. But I will also say, it's interesting for me because I love horror movies and fear and avoid them. So I've always been quite sensitive, especially to violence, and I tend to avoid that for the most part. And when I was in university, I had to take Film 101, which I was very excited about, but then I found out that Film 101 was going to be all horror. So I was forced to watch The Shining, The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby, A Night of the Living Dead, like all of these classic horror films. And it was so great because we got to really learn, some of the theory around these horror movies, which made them less disturbing to me. Mm-hmm. And also, I love them. Like, The Shining remains one of my favorite movies maybe ever. Mm. And so many horror movies, like Get Out is another one of my absolute favorite horror movies of all time. And The Substance might be one of them too. So I feel like it's often horror movies that really stick with me. And part of the reason for this that I think is so interesting is that what a horror movie is for is to take a cultural anxiety and make it real. Mm. So it gives like a material structure and face and narrative to something that we fear. So zombies are, plague or immigration, it's sort of others. The Shining is actually about addiction and domestic violence. There are so many that are about mental illness. Like, I think there are a lot of ways that you can take a horror movie as a metaphor for something in a really useful way. And Get Out was so, so good for that because it was about racial tensions. And that's not seen very often. I think it was done so, so well. And so I'm really glad that you and some other friends insisted that I watch The Substance. I did love it. When it was screened, I think it was at Cannes, it had a 9-minute standing ovation and also had a bunch of people leave the theater partway through. So it was either you couldn't stand to even get through it or you were absolutely obsessed. I think you and I are on the obsessed side of the spectrum. Though we can think a little bit about why folks walked out. I mean, it was just so disgusting. Like, I think that's ultimately...
Yeah.
Like my husband being like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I gotta get out of here. I get that. But I think at the same time, maybe it's over the topness. It has also it's a very obvious message. Like, it's so extreme in its message. But even within that, I think, I love that about it. I think it's refreshingly over the top. Yeah. And also there are so many themes that you can read into it. Like, I think it's about more than just, this woman's obsessed with anti-aging and it's dangerous. Like, that's one of the really blatant messages. But I think there's so many other that sit underneath that I want to talk about today. So I would have been with the standing ovation. Well, maybe at the time I was a bit shocked. I was like, oh my God, how do I process this? But I can't stop thinking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so wonderfully disgusting and shocking and so compelling, and I love how it's like it's not a subtle movie. It's saying, everything is so broad. Like, I love how it's just like Elizabeth Sparkle is the star, and then she's not. And then, it's like with Sue, who is Elizabeth Sparkle's other half or whatever through The Substance. Sue is auditioning for the big show and then like rehearsing for the big New Year's show. Like, everything is so general, which is like really, really fun. I love that they're not like, we have to make perfect sense of this world. It's like, no, like, we all understand what this is doing and what it's saying. We don't need this like extensive backstory for anybody to really to really understand it. And I love that. And I will say, like, probably one of the most disgusting moments for me is Dennis Quaid eating the shrimp. Like,
100%.
my gosh.
Most
And
horrifying moment.
So horrifying. It makes me like, I mean, I'm mostly vegan. Like, I'm a flexitarian for the most part, and I don't really eat much fish, but it makes me like really not want to have shrimp.
Yeah, and Dennis Quaid actually ate all of that shrimp. Like, he was committed, and he ate that I don't even know how much shrimp that was. It was so much. And I feel like there was an interview somewhere where Demi Moore agrees that that's the moment that's most disgusting in this whole disgusting movie.
And what I love about that is, well, like, just talking for a second about the role of men in this film, you know, you have this man who is like the boss, the executive. He holds all of the power in terms of like making decisions of who's going to be culturally significant. He decides Demi Moore's Elizabeth Sparkle is done. He decides everything. And he's got this gaggle of like old white men behind him as he kind of like proudly walks through. Like, his walk is so hilarious. Like, it's so specific in its broadness that it's just like, here is like this villainous character. And what I find really interesting is in the shots of Dennis Quaid, but also all of the men, like every single shot of every single man in this film, it's so specific, like the way that we look at the men. Like, Dennis Quaid is so in the space of a camera. It's almost, I don't know if it is a fisheye lens, but it has that feel where it's like he's sort of,
it is, yeah.
Yeah, it's like he's really in her space. And same with, you know, the moment when she runs into this man that she, you know, knew when she was a girl before she became like the Elizabeth Sparkle. And his as well, like, you almost don't even see his whole body. Like, he's daunting. He's so threateningly in her space. And it's like these men are just like, you feel so confronted by them. And I just think that is just brilliant. And I remember too at the beginning when Sue is doing her workout routine and there's all of these butt shots, like the way that the camera looks at women is apparently really signature to this filmmaker. Like, she's kind of known for the butt shot. And I remember my friend and I, you know, didn't know who this filmmaker was. She was new to me at this time. And my friend and I, when the movie finished, I was like, I need to look up who made this film, because like, if this is a guy who made this film, like, I don't know how I'd feel about it, but the fact that it is a woman making this film is so key to understanding like the satire behind all of that. It's just like, yeah, like this over exaggerated, like just like zoomed right in on the butt cheek. Like, it's so hilarious and brilliant. And it's like, yeah, that is how it feels to exist sometimes in this world. Like, the fixation on the body and youth and beauty and all those things is just like so compellingly done through just the way that you're watching the movie and the way that you're engrossed in the world. And yeah.
Absolutely. I think ultimately this strange body horror movie was incredibly relatable. Like, I feel like it expressed what it feels like to be inside a woman or a feminine person's body so accurately, you know, in that nightmarish sort of way. Like, you know that that's not what the world really is, but it feels like that. It feels like sometimes men are coming at you in that really invasive way. And it feels like, you know, towards the end when we meet Monstro Elisa Sue, we'll talk more about, there's such heart to her. Like, there's something about her that just feels so relatable, and she's kind of up on the stage and she's this horrifying creature and she's trying to just do her thing. And I feel like so many times in my life I've felt that way, where like I have to walk out of the house just feeling like, you know, there's something different about my body, whether it's aging or weight gain or zits or something like that, and you just feel like this absolute monster, and it's all that people can look at. The reality is most people aren't noticing that kind of thing, but it feels like that. And there was a moment when my husband said to me, is this what it's like to be inside a woman's mind? And I was like, yes it is. This is exactly what it feels like a lot of the time. But the other thing I was going to add to what you were saying is the butt shots, I think, were another reason why my husband and I had such different responses to it. So we watched it over 2 nights, which I think actually might have helped because it's quite a long movie. And maybe if you're sitting there in the theater and you're kind of having to go through the horror over and over and over again, it's like pretty intense. So we kind of watched the first half one night, and we were both really intrigued and wanted to watch more. And my husband was really into it at that point. And, you know, nothing against my husband, but at that point, we had seen a lot of naked women that are very beautiful. That's a lot of what had been happening in the movie so far. I think it's worth pointing out that Demi Moore, who I think is 62, is like the most beautiful. Like, if I could age like that, I mean, you know, I don't know that I would take a substance to look like her in that way, but she's incredibly beautiful, like has aged so beautifully. And her choice as, you know, this aged out actress, she's an icon in real life. This is some of this stuff is actually happening for her. Like, I couldn't help but wonder what that was like for her to be in this role. And then when I was doing a bit of research later too, I learned that Margaret Qualley, I was also kind of wondering for her, like, what's it like to be cast as the perfect hotter, younger clone, you know? What's it like to have, there's a scene where she's looking at her body in the mirror and she's just like, yes, 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 I love it, I love it, I love it, right? And, you know, I don't know that many people that look at themselves in the mirror like that. And so I was wondering what it was like for this actor. And apparently she had prosthetics, like she had done this really extreme sort of workout routine in order to shape her body in this specific way. That is not what she looks like normally, right? And so how interesting to be cast as the younger, hotter one and still need modifications, right? Like it's still not enough to just be you. And apparently she went through being in the prosthetics and stuff, especially in the Monstrous part, like she was having some panic attacks and stuff. Like it was really, really stressful to be in that situation. So I think in many ways it was actually harder for the younger actor. Whereas Demi Moore, who's so seasoned, you know, she's just going through it like, yep, we'll do it as long as we need to do it. And I don't know how many of you saw her Hot Ones, but she was out spicing the guy that does the hot sauces. She's just like,
I've never seen anyone just
so
be completely unfazed. I was like she, like the bomb. She was just like, yeah, it's not, I don't like it. I'm like, everybody else is like crying when they did this one. Like, she's a champion. I love her.
Cool. She's so cool. But in any case, so we're watching the first half of this movie where there's all these beautiful women, Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley, just gorgeous, all of these things, lots of nudity. And one of the things I appreciated about this movie is how intensely it subverts the male gaze, right? So the butt shot is the male gaze, right? The male gaze is this idea that these films are shot, you know, usually the camera is from the perspective of men. You will see women as cuts of meat. You know, it's usually the men in the movies that will be seen as sort of the human beings in the movie, and the women are always seen as objects. And so people in film have been thinking about the male gaze for a long time. Is there such a thing as a female gaze? What would it be like to create a movie from the perspective of the female gaze? And so on. So I don't think that this movie was filmed necessarily from the female gaze, but it was like doing something violent to the male gaze. Yes. So one of my favorite moments in the movie was when there is one of those close-up butt shots of Sue and something pops out of her butt really suddenly. There's like a lump in her butt and she's like, ah! And then she goes by herself to figure out what it is, and she like very disgustingly sort of shifts it through her flesh and finds a way to pull it out of her belly button, and it is a chicken drumstick, which is the chicken drumstick that her other, Elizabeth, had binge eaten the night before. And it's a dream, I guess. She kind of wakes up from, it's not, and you never know what's dreaming and what's real in this movie. Like, there's no separation. But what I loved about that is, you know, if you're watching that butt shot being like, yeah, like, this is great, it's turning me on, and then there's a gross chicken drumstick just, like, in the butt. You know, you're just like, okay, like, that has absolutely yucked that yum, right? Like, yes. And so many times it's like that, right? It's there.
A literal piece of meat? Here you go. What
I'll
do you
give
think
you
about
a piece
that?
of meat. Absolutely, 100%. Yeah. Again, not subtle. Not subtle. But yeah, there's that other scene too where Elizabeth is learning to cook these disgusting. The food in this movie is so gross. Yeah. It's like, you know, all the grossest French meals that you can think of. They're like blood sausage and whatever. Yeah. And she's like manhandling a raw chicken while like interspersed with cuts of Sue's body that are really hot. So again, It's kind of like the movie is not allowing you to be sexually aroused by Sue's body because it keeps on interrupting with this piece of meat thing. Like, you can't sit there and have that experience in that way, right?
Yes. Yes. I love that lens of like considering that, because you're right. It's so like, you know, even when she's when Sue has taken home this like hot kind of motorcycle guy or whatever, like, and she's in that full cat suit and she's like really like giving, and then what happens where she sort of like realizes like, oh no, I have to like go and I need more time, essentially, is kind of the repeated theme that happens for Sue, where she's like, no, like, I deserve to be here more, kind of thing. And so I feel like that might be the first moment when she decides to take more of the spinal fluid, which is what happens, which is like quite nasty. But yeah, there's something sort of physical that happens to her body. I kind of forget exactly what it was that made her sort of go, oh no, I have to. It's almost like if you've ever been
nosebleed, actually. I think
the
she
nosebleed, yeah, her nose bleeds, and she's like, oh my God. And it's kind of like that thing of like, you're out and then like your stomach is really upset and you're like, oh my God, I have to go.
Yeah.
And she just like has that moment where she's like, yeah, and she's in this cat suit and like no one has ever looked hotter, and then her nose starts to bleed and she's like panicking and has to go and, you know, steal the life from her dying self. And it's like, it's not sexy. It's like quite disgusting and horrifying.
And then she goes back and they continue to make out. And then there's sort of a sudden flash to like all this gross viscera coming out of her spine.
Yes.
And then you kind of wake up and it's like, whose dream was that? Like it's again, one of those sort of dreamlike moments where something interrupts that sort of sexy moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's so brilliant in how it does that.
Yeah, I think similar to that idea, this is monstrous feminine right here, especially as we get into Monstro Elissa Sue, who we love.
We love
her. And monstrous feminine, I talked about a little bit in my my episode on Return to Oz, where there's just like a really cool female villain in that movie. I think I've always really loved the monstrous feminine, and one of the things I love about it is that it feels really subversive, right? Because when you have monstrous feminine, usually what that means is a woman who doesn't follow the rules of patriarchy becomes monstrous in some way. And often she's quite seductive. So we're thinking vampire, we're thinking, you know, Jennifer's Body, we're thinking, I don't know, anytime a woman becomes sort of like an evil queen or something like that, she's become monstrous. And she's often both beautiful and disgusting in a certain way. She often has both of those qualities, you know. Even in Buffy, if you remember, there was like a really hot substitute teacher who came and hit on Xander, and it turned out she was a praying mantis, and a praying mantis will cut off the head of her mate, right? And so that's kind of monstrous feminine. And I've been writing these books about divine feminine figures in all cultures, like across history. And one of the things that I find really fascinating is that a lot of these ancient goddesses, some of whom came from matriarchal cultures, like pre the rise of patriarchy, and the goddess always represented both death and life. So she was about the cycle, right? And in patriarchy, there's a lot of like gods and kings who just hold on to power and control as long as they possibly can. There's no death and renewal cycle that happens with them. And so I think anytime I see a monstrous feminine, especially when it's as monstrous as Monstro Elissa Sue, who is disgusting.
Yes.
And what's the word for it? She's all different bits and pieces. Like, she's not coherent, right? She's incoherent. She's chaotic.
Yeah.
And for me, it feels like anytime I see that, it's almost this rebel remembering of these ancient deities that could hold decay and death, but knew what to do with it, right? Because the problem with Monstro Elissa Sue is that the whole process was interrupting aging, interrupting death, like trying to hold on to life. And when you hold on to life too hard, it multiplies and becomes kind of, I don't know if you'd say cancerous or tumorous or something like that, the way that Monstro Elissa Sue's body does. And so it's interesting to me to think of all these divine feminine goddesses that would just have killed that. Like, they would have just been like, we're aging now, and now you're a crone, and that's what you do, and then you die, and you can be maiden again next time, you know? Which is, again, not what our culture is about. Like, that's not, those stories aren't what we're used to. So I feel like anytime I see a monstrous feminine, it's almost like there's something in me that remembered before I even knew this information, where it's just kind of like, yes, there is something about that feels so true, like that there is something about the feminine that can be powerful in these ways that are really subversive. And maybe that's just because we are in a patriarchal culture and femininity is almost by definition in this culture kind of, what's the word, like subjected or oppressed or repressed.
Yeah.
It's not seen as powerful, right? And here there is this odd experience of Elizabeth in particular is not in power, and I think that's why she takes the substance. And as we go through the movie, she doesn't take the substance to be attractive to men, right? Because the men in here she's got no interest in, and they're just awful. You know, the man who knew her from high school feels really creepy. Her next door neighbor feels really creepy. Harvey the boss is really creepy. Another favorite moment is the gaggle of white men who giggle as they run down the hallway following the hot women behind Harvey. Like, there's no men in here that she would, or anyone would want to sleep with. Even the motorcycle guy, like, he's hot, but he's also really mean to Elizabeth later, and he doesn't have much of a personality. And so you get the sense that she's not taking the substance for love. She's taking it for power, right? Because that's what she loses as she becomes older. So I think the whole power narrative is really fascinating in this movie from those perspectives.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes to everything you just said. Yeah, there's what you're saying about the monstrous feminine. There's something that is just so vulnerable and precious and honest about Monstroso El Sisu. Like the way, like the vulnerability in her and how she just proudly steps into the spotlight. You know, and before chaos ensues when, you know, she starts like throwing up a boob and like all of those things, like the determination to be like, I'm going to take my rightful place. I've worked hard and I have a song to sing, you know? And I just think that there's something like, she's so endearing. Like you just love her. And I feel like there's a freedom in her that ultimately is what Elizabeth Sparkle like wanted, was this freedom to just express and to just be without this like these confines of like, oh, you're done now and we're going to get rid of all these pictures of you and like we don't care what happens to you, you know? Like people do care, they're horrified in how they care, but like, you know, it's just this vulnerability and this freedom to just like be herself, which she can do because she's completely abandoned the body, like in the way that we sort of know and understand it. It's become this grotesque thing. And so, you know, she can no longer, it's not something that she can really control, but what she does have is like her soul and her like heart. And that's the thing that like really comes through and everyone's horrified by it because they can't see past, you know, the monstrous figure, but that is the most profound part of her. And even at the end when she becomes the slime, it's just the face, like the way that she's smiling when she kind of, you know, soups on over to the star. Like, it's like, she's like, I'm me. This is me. Like, I don't know. There's something so like, she is free from the corporeal form. And so she can finally like express herself, which is like, you know, so it's like, it's so beautiful and heartfelt. That's why I think it sort of becomes like, yes, it's a horror movie and it's like there's a ton of gross out, like a lot of like kind of parts, but like ultimately it's such a heartwarming story. I'm like, finally she's like free of these men. Like they don't want to look at her. Nobody wants to look at her. She's like, I don't have to be this object anymore. And she's literally like becomes this liquid at the end. Like she's not even a tangible object. She becomes washed away, which is like a sadness in and of itself. But like, yeah, there's just something so profound about her beauty and her vulnerability that really comes through in this grotesque figure, you know?
I think that point about freedom is so beautiful. And actually that speaks to the goddesses a little bit as well, because some of the goddesses that I have been studying are, you know, the Baba Yaga is this old witch in the woods who's got like one leg is just a bone and she's really hunched over and very old, you know. Dhumavati in tantric tradition is kind of similar, like aged goddess of disappointment and despair. There's a goddess that I love in the tantric tradition, who's cut off her own head, and then from the blood from her throat, she's feeding her attendants and her own head, which she's holding in her hand.
Love that.
And her name's Chinnamasta, and she's really about love, actually. She's about, like, you know, you cut off your head to open your own heart, like getting rid of the ego in order to share sort of from the heart. But I feel like as I'm reading about these characters, some of them too, you know, like Morgan Le Fay was a shapeshifter, you know. There are all these different characters who found ways to be, you know, ugly when they needed to be, like being ugly as a power, right? Being ugly as a moment where you step away from the male gaze and the power of patriarchy, and you get to be left alone. Like, nobody fucks with the Baba Yaga. She hangs out in her forest cabin, which has chicken legs, and she surrounds herself with, you know, a fence decorated with human skulls or whatever, and she's like, F you, patriarchy, I'm going to do it my way, right? And a lot of these other goddesses, I feel like, have that same energy. And when somebody like the Morrigan, you know, she's a Celtic goddess who can be very beautiful and very seductive, but she can also disguise herself as like the ugly old woman. And the test for the night is like, will you give this old woman a kiss and like see past the ugliness? Because if you can, I'll give you a gift, but if you can't, I'll curse you forever and you'll die, you know, or whatever it is. And it's just, again, with that monstrous feminine of kind of like, it's sometimes, you know, we have this feeling that we have to play by these rules. You know, we have to look a certain way. We have to be a certain size. We have to, you know, not show our age. We have to conceal, cover, like hide all of these parts of ourselves. But ultimately, you know, Monstro does become free because she's so unappealing and she's so unwanted, and yet she takes her place, right? Like she takes her place in the spotlight, literally, and then she does a spectacle of disgusting, which is a very Carrie like gallons of fake blood being used, sprayed extensively, like much more than in Carrie. You know, to just it's like it feels like a real fuck you to those patriarchal rules, you know, which is kind of what the monstrous feminine can do. So I feel like that idea that she's actually free, much freer than Elizabeth or Sue were in her ugliness, is really powerful. And there is like the moment I can't stop thinking about, I have like little favorite moments in the substance, and one of my favorites was when Monstro was getting ready to go into the spotlight, and she's just curling her one strand of hair with her little curling iron, and as she does it, there's this little sigh. She goes like she's just curling her little one hair. And there's something about that that's just, I don't even know what that sigh means, but it's just something about that. You're just like, girl, like, we would be friends. Like, I get you.
All in a day, you know, like, what it means to be a woman, you know? Just gotta...
You just curl that one strand of hair. You do what you can. Just squishing the earrings into her, like, bits of flesh because she has no ears. Like, oh, don't get that weird eye back there. Like, do it beside the eye.
Yeah. It's so good. Oh my gosh, it's so good. Yeah, I really resonate with that. Like, it makes me think of, like, this is more of just like a personal reflection, but when I was younger, I did competitive dance. And of course, in the dance world, there's like a lot of, you know, the body is like very, like, you're hyper focused on like every little speck of yourself. But I had this one amazing mentor teacher who, you know, really, and I think this is true in a lot of like modern dance and a lot of those theories that kind of rejected the kind of conformity and the sort of like lines and all of those kinds of things that ballet, like classical ballet did, and modern dance sort of like rejected all of that and was just like, no, let's create different shapes with our bodies. And I remember my mentor was like, it's beautiful when it's ugly. She's like, like, make it ugly. That's what's beautiful. Like, I don't want to see, you know, this pointed toe and a beautiful arabesque. She's like, I want to see it like, you know, hunched over, like there's beauty in that. And I remember as a kid who grew up, you know, I didn't really have a dancer body. Like, I was told a lot that I was just like not meant to be a dancer. And I just kind of like, I think I just had a bit of like, I don't know if it was like a healthy amount of delusion where I was just like, okay, if that's what you think, but I'm still going to do this. Like, I just had such a determination. And I remember just really being like, hey, I can do that. Like, hey, that's how I do it. And then, like, you know, it really just sparked something in me where my artistry was really born out of that, like, beauty in the ugliness. And so I've really always, like, carried that with me as, like, I don't need to actually be thin. And I mean, of course, like, I have that messaging, and don't get me wrong, I still am in this industry and there's so much pressure, like it's just madness. But yeah, I still kind of hold true to that. Like, that seems like it really cemented in my value system of like what it means to be an artist. And, you know, navigating the world at that time, like, as a feminine person, just kind of being like, yeah, I don't, okay, like, yeah, I mean, sure, I look like that. And of course, there's a lot of stuff, like a lot of sadness and grief and like jealousy and all of these other things that come with that living in a patriarchy. But I do feel very privileged that I was kind of taught that lesson really young, because I feel like it's really informed a lot of like who I am as a person and why I love someone like Monstrous Elsa Sue so hard. I'm like, yes, there's so much power in your presence and your voice, you know?
Absolutely. And some of what you're saying is just making me think about disordered eating. Because you and I hope it's okay that I say this, but you and I both have a history with that, with disordered eating. And so many more people do than probably, is talked about.
Yeah.
And I feel like the little anorexic in me that's still there, in certain ways, related to this movie really heavily, Specifically for me, like my anorexia came out of some severe anxiety, and I had food phobia, which was just like this terror that food was going to make me sick. And I had sort of a terror of throwing up and all these things. And I thought it was really interesting that in this movie, which is about, what your body looks like, the specifics of what your body looks like, making your body fit a certain stereotype or whatever it is, all of the food was disgusting. I don't think there was any food in this movie that looked appealing in any way, like starting from the shrimp. Yeah. Where Elizabeth is not eating anything and Harvey is just covered in shrimp mess, But the chicken drumstick was so disgusting. The binge eating that Elizabeth does, where she just eats everything, and the apartment the next day is just disgusting, covered in food scraps. There's no moment of someone kind of having like a delicious, satisfying bite of food, right? And I feel like that anorexic in me was just like, yes, food, it's this sort of thing of like, food is both disgusting and scary, and it also can make you fat, I guess is the idea, right? It's like that chicken drumstick thing of just the regret that you can feel the next day, or like times where I've felt like I've eaten too, which still happens to me. I mean, you're in recovery from this stuff, but it never totally goes away, right? Yeah. That there's this feeling of like, if I've eaten too much, it's like my skin feels greasy, or I feel like it shows on my face, like what I've eaten. Like it is this kind of monstrous feeling that kind of comes up in me in certain ways. And I feel like the movie really reflected that so well. I know there was also this element of addiction. And disordered eating is very, very close to addiction, right? Like it has that similar energy to addiction where, for me, not eating, for some people overeating or binging or purging or whatever it is, like it's something that you do in order to quiet the anxiety that you feel around food. And for a lot of us, it is sort of invented by or in collaboration with this patriarchal idea that your body has to be infinitely thin. Like there's no thin enough that ever exists, right? Like it's always just diminish until what? Until you're a liquid, right? Like until you explode, like until there's nothing left of you. That's sort of the nth degree of where disordered eating can sometimes take us, even if we're not thinking about it in that way logically. And so in a way, I thought like this movie actually showed, what was it? It was like a way of speaking to disordered eating that the eating disordered part of me like really deeply related to. I'm not sure it resolves anything about that, but there was something that felt so right to that part of me that was just like, yes, food is disgusting, and it makes your body feel out of control. Like I guess that's where for me a lot of that feeling is like out of control. And then the way that like Monstrous Sue's demise is chaotic. Like everything about her is chaotic. Nothing is contained, right? Things are always falling out. The boobs are falling out. Liquids are falling out. Blood is spraying. She's like broken into all these pieces. You don't even know where her sort of consciousness is in that monstrous body, right? And then she becomes liquid at the end. Like it is, in a way, I don't know, it's like, it's in this odd way, I'm not sure if it was sort of like a desire to almost go to that place from a disordered eating perspective, or if it's like desperately trying to keep the pieces together and that's why you do the disordered eating thing, or both on some level. Like I feel like there was just something that really spoke to me that I'm still processing out loud. I guess I haven't quite sorted out what it all means, but I'd love to know your thoughts about that, because I know you have your own experience that was just different from mine.
Yeah. My eating disorder manifested as orthorexia, which is like an obsession with like healthy eating. So like I went through years actually of like being on cleanses, eating like no sugar, even from like vegetables, like carrots were bad food in my mind at that time. Like eating a carrot was like, oh, you're not healthy if you eat a carrot, which is like, oh my God, what a world we live in. What a horrible world we live in sometimes. But yeah, I was like really, I did the master cleanse. I'm sure folks from the early aughts remember that, where it's like you have like maple syrup and lemon juice and that's all you eat. And I did that for 2 weeks. And I was like, look how flat my stomach is. And it's like, well, there's nothing in there and you've shit it all out. So
the old shit yourself clean diet.
yeah, exactly. Like,
or shit yourself thin, sorry.
Yeah, shit yourself thin. And it was like, and I remember going into the health food store after and I was like, so I just like, I'm coming back from the master cleanse and I started to incorporate solids, and by solids, I was eating lettuce, just lettuce, chewing it like really extensively, like, and that was just, and I was just like, and everyone was like, wow, you look so good, like the way that it feeds into itself. And I was also obsessively exercising as well. Like waking up at 4 a.m. to do a full kettlebell weights workout and then going to hot yoga and then going to a dance class, like just insane. But yeah, I feel like what you're saying really resonates with me, like that the way that food was just so disgusting, and where Elizabeth was just like, well, fuck it, because I'm becoming this person and I can't control how I look. So I'm gonna fuck her life up by eating all this and making a huge mess. I'm gonna eat whatever I want because, she probably spent her whole career like having her food controlled. And so it's like almost like this other way of eliciting control of like, like, well, you know what? If I'm gonna look disgusting, then I don't fucking care. And I definitely have had that because I feel like the orthorexia, like for me, it was years of that. But then I feel like I do go into binge eating a lot. Like I definitely have that. It still kind of comes up for me. And I feel like that's what I really resonated with about watching Elizabeth so much. It was just like, well, I can't control how I look and everybody hates me. So I'm just going to make this big mess and I don't care how disgusting it is. And I'm just going to do it. And then, yeah, you don't see Sue eating ever. I mean, you see her maybe drinking alcohol or whatever, but you really don't see her consuming anything. And it's kind of like these extremes that are kind of two sides of the same coin. And yeah, it's interesting because it's like, I know what you mean about looking at it and being like, yeah, food is disgusting. That is the part of me that is like, it's like a negative reinforcement of like that, like, yes, but yeah, you're right. There's no moment where anybody is like savoring anything, where anybody is like enjoying anything, really.
Enjoying their bodies, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, you get the sense, too, that Elizabeth is so lonely, right? Like, she has this massive apartment with barely anything in it. At the very beginning, there's someone vacuuming for her, and then she must get rid of that person or something because of the whole situation, because she vacuums herself later. But, again, it's part of this sort of, where's the backstory, who are these people? Like, they have no family, nothing like that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, a healthy relationship with food is a healthy relationship with the body, right? Mm-hmm. Which is, even using the word healthy there, I mean, it's so hard to even pin down what that means, right? Yeah. But if you love yourself and your body, if you're in a loving relationship with yourself and your body, then food is a part of that, right? It's like feeding your body the things that it wants and not overfeeding it, right? Because like when you get that fullness signal, it's like you want to respect that and so on. Mm-hmm. And, one of the other sort of lenses I was using to look at this film, like one thing that I thought was really fascinating was just the concept that there are these two selves. Mm-hmm. And the substance guy on the phone keeps telling them, you're one. Like, don't forget that you're the same person. Yeah. But they don't share a consciousness. They share dreams, I think, sometimes, but they don't share a consciousness. And so they are these different selves. And there are certain moments where you witness how the selves talk to each other. Mm-hmm. Especially at the end when, that sort of fascinating sequence where Elizabeth finally decides to terminate the experiment. And she kills Sue, essentially. And then she panics and she says, you're the most lovable part of me. And it's this panic of like, I need you to exist because without you, I'm completely worth nothing, right? And so she does this, they're always going off brand with this substance that they shouldn't be. But she brings her back to life and the two of them are conscious at the same time, which has never happened before in the movie.
Yeah.
And the way they talk to each other, I think Sue says to Elizabeth something like, "You old fat bitch," or something like that, right? And you're just like, that's exactly what the voice sounds like inside my head, you know, in those moments when I've eaten too much or whatever it is. Like, we can be so cruel to ourselves in a way that we would never say something like that to another human being. But you hear the voice in your own head, right? And so one of the strategies that I use a lot in my counseling practice is internal family systems, which is essentially this idea that we have lots of different parts. Like, we have almost an internal family with different parts that have different roles and things like that. And this practice is really based on learning to listen to all of the different parts so that they can communicate with each other, even if and when they disagree, so that everybody belongs, right? Because a lot of the time what we tend to do is we try to exile parts of ourselves. Like that anorexic part of me, for example, I might want to just put her in a closet somewhere and like never engage with her again. But what often happens is when we try to exile parts of ourselves, they get stronger and stronger, just like Sue and Elizabeth, right? It's like trying to ignore, you know, for Sue, it's like the ugly part of her she's keeping in this literal closet in a very Dorian Gray, you know, kind of way, and only showing the beautiful parts of herself, whereas she's got this sort of like secret off in the corner, and that secret kills her, right? And then she kills it, and they kill each other, and it becomes this whole thing. But, you know, this whole concept I find really interesting and really important, because for me, the way therapy has often been in the past is my ego is coming into the therapy room because I've decided I don't like what these parts of me are doing, right? Let's say it's disordered eating, right? I don't like the part of me that binge eats, so I want to get rid of that part. And then you have this therapy where it's like your conscious mind is in a very colonial way trying to override what this other part of you is doing, so that you can be a mono mind colonial. This is who I think I am. This is who I think I'm supposed to be. Whereas internal family systems is almost more of an indigenous perspective, an indigenous way of looking at things, where you want to look at the relationship between everything, so that nobody is the decider, essentially, of what's happening. Though in that practice, you'll have kind of an observing self, and you'll check in with the observing self. But in my experience, the observing self must shut up and listen to the parts that have been exiled. If the observing self goes in and tries to judge or fix, it's not going to work, right? So if I can go in and observe the disordered eating part of me and ask that part, how are you hurting? How are you trying to protect me? Like, what do you need? What's happening for you when you're binge eating, right? And then you can learn, a lot of the time, these addictive behaviors come from these parts that are A, trying to protect us, B, trying to survive. Like, for a lot of us, that addictive behavior is the difference between us and death, right? It's like what protects us from death. It's an extreme way of saying it, but a lot of the time that's what it is. And so, you know, if we take this perspective of just like, oh, you should just quit doing that thing, that's never going to work, because the part of you that is in addiction is doing that in order to try to protect you from something. So all of this to say, the whole time you're watching Sue and Elizabeth, and you're just being like, just do week on, week off. Like respect each other, take care of each other's bodies, like don't abuse each other, right? And Sue abuses Elizabeth's body so thoroughly in a way that really references Requiem for a Dream, which is a film that's all about addiction. And there's kind of a similar shot of like Jared Leto, you know, shooting up into sort of a necrotic vein in his arm. Like, it looks very similar to the way Sue is pulling the spinal fluid from Elizabeth. So anyway, I think that, you know, it's sort of this perspective of like the tragedy of when you don't reconcile with yourself or selves. And if you can kind of find a way to accept all of those parts of yourself, not to necessarily let them continue to do destructive behaviors, but rather to understand, where is this destructive behavior coming from? What does this need? How is there a wound here that needs to be healed? How can I have different coping mechanisms to help this part so it doesn't have to do that anymore, right? Which is a very different way of approaching things than a lot of traditional therapy has been. And I think it's really, really powerful.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Yes. That's such a like real way of like considering all of that, like those two parts of yourself that sometimes you hate both of those parts of yourself. The part of yourself that is like, that looks great and is like happy and meeting everybody's expectations. And then the part of you that is like sort of full of shame and in the shadows, eating the chicken out of the garbage or like whatever. Like, you know, you sort of like hate both of those. And then it's like all you're really left with is this hatred of yourself. And it's interesting that like in the movie, like the one time that these two sort of get synthesized is into this ugliness where, like I was saying earlier, like the spirit and the heart really comes through. It's like, you know, there's yeah, like we're saying, like with the freedom of releasing both of the expectations of both of those things, and not by ignoring them, but by having them be in near death conflict with one another to create this like other being that sort of synthesizes everything. It's like, I feel like that's, yeah, part of why you love Monstroso Elsa Sue so much, is because she's kind of inherited both of these things within her, that she has the desire and the love and all those things. And yeah, like she,
and part of her monstrousness is her multiplicity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a bit of a recall to, like, in the beginning when Sue is about to do the audition, the auditioning men say something like, oh, her boobs are not quite in the right place, or, you know, she's got all her body parts in the right places, or something like that.
Yeah.
And Monstro Elissa Sue rebels by being so in the wrong place. You know, she's got eyes and ears everywhere, and bits and pieces, and boobs and butt, like, all in the wrong places, and there's many, right?
Yeah.
Which again is this sort of inversion of like, oh, you want boobs, you want butt, like here they all are together in one monstrous
How many do you
pile.
want?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's sort of like that various self thing. It's like Sue, in one interview that I read, I think it was with the director, she was saying something about Sue being an externalization of internalized misogyny. You know, having sort of a physical representation of yourself that plays by the rules, that is perfect, that is loved by everyone, all of these things. And she's so hateful. Like, she's what was another thing that I saw that was like a, you know, evil villain Barbie or something like that, you know?
Totally.
She's like so gorgeous, but she's actually quite awful.
Yeah.
And everybody in this movie is awful. Like, except Monstro Elissa Sue. She's the hero.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
she
so
brings
true.
It all together.
Sue is so full of this hatred and anger because it requires that of you to maintain that. Like, you have to hate and reject, you know, the person who's too old for society, or the person's too ugly or too fat or whatever. Like, and I feel like we really see that in you know, really kind of like right-wing conservative kind of women who often, like, they've played by the rules. These women who go to these colleges that, you know, like, they just like all have the same hair and they all look exactly the same. And there's such a hatred of like queerness and of fatness and of like neurodivergence and disability. Like, there's such a rejection of people, and it's coming from a place of like just extreme hatred. And it's like, yeah, because you're afraid of what the patriarchy will do to you. And so you're trying to really separate yourself from these people who either aren't afraid or who are afraid and who are just like, well, I don't, but like, fuck it.
Just being human beings.
Just existing. And yeah, I feel like she really encompasses that like really quite perfectly, where it's like the animosity towards difference is like so extreme.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about some of the references in the movie, because I think that was interesting. Added again to the dreamlike quality of the film was many overt references to classic horror films, including The Shining. We have these long hallways that immediately recall the Overlook Hotel, is what it's called in the movie, right? And at the end, there is, sure enough, that gush of blood coming through the hallways, which I don't know that Stephen King meant it as a menstruation metaphor, but I feel like the blood coming through the hallway felt like that in this movie. It's sort of what it recalled for me.
Yeah.
There was there were some interesting references to birth and like the disgustingness of birth, I think, in this film, like the way that, you know, Sue is born out of Elizabeth's back in a vulvar sort of shape, and the birth of the boob out of her body, which was also a barf, like
the egg,
something really just
like the
egg. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. So there was a lot of that kind of, maybe part of that was about how the ideal woman has none of that disgustingness, right? Like, she doesn't menstruate, she doesn't give birth in this disgusting way, like, she remains perfect in all ways, which means she's not human, right? She doesn't have the human abilities of sort of a human body. So, again, maybe that was just a bit of an inversion, you know, of Stephen King. I mean, I love Stephen King, I love The Shining, as I said, and also somewhat of a patriarchal guy, I suppose. And so to kind of take that image of The Shining, which also I couldn't help but think of Beyonce in the Lemonade.
Yes.
short film, video album thing, whatever it was called, where she's standing in front of the doors and they open and there's this water that just gushes behind her. And that's a reference to, I believe it's Oshun, who is a West African goddess of fertility and the rivers of the sweet water. And there's all this interesting stuff about how Oshun was overlooked in the beginning. At the time of creation, there were these 17 Orishas that were creating the world, and they couldn't get anything done because they forgot to ask for help from the one woman that was with them. And when they finally figured that out, they could create life because they needed the woman to be there, and that was like a really important message from it. So I don't know if she was, deliberately referencing Beyonce and Lemonade and Oshun there, but there was something menstrual for me about that shining moment of the blood coming down the hallway.
Yeah, it's like she can't contain herself, and so she erupts, into this thing of blood and body and all of this. And yeah, I think it's really interesting what you're saying about like how disgustingness is so hidden. And it's like, if we're thinking about menstruation, and for people who menstruate, it's like I think about that one person who was like a runner and was bleeding and like didn't want to wear like a tampon or whatever, and just like was like free bleeding and got like so much attention. It's just like, literally, who cares? But yeah, it's like, how dare you have like a body that does this thing that it just does? Like, that's so bad.
It's from that control perspective too. Like, you can't control, well, you can sort of control menstruation, I guess. Like, there are drugs you can take to control menstruation. Having given birth once before in my life, you can't control that. It was one of the coolest things in many ways for me to experience that, of just being like, oh, my body's doing this thing. Like, I had a lot of mental preparation for it, being like, this is how you push and this is how you're supposed to do it and whatever. But when it started happening, I was like, oh, this is just happening. Like,
yeah.
It's just, this is what's going on. You can't hold it back, like the gush of it all, right? And so, yeah, we've got The Shining, we've got Requiem for a Dream, Carrie, of course, yeah, Picture of Dorian Gray, we talked about that a little bit. The Fly, the sort of monstrous transformation related to power. And also, Death Becomes Her, which you and I both watched.
We watched it.
How does it contrast and compare? And what I thought was so interesting was that the plot was the same. There's an aging actress who's obsessed with beauty and power, who gets in a car crash, and after the car crash is given a note with an address on it in this 1992 movie. And she goes to the address, and Isabella Rossellini is wearing nothing but a necklace. And it's a revelation.
It's so beautiful.
She's so beautiful. And she's the devil, maybe, or like, you don't really know who she is, but she's this sort of goddess character. Gives this aging actress a substance, which gives her youth and beauty at a great cost, right? In this case, the cost is that if she dies, she can't die. She has to continue to live with her body that continues to decay.
Yeah.
So again, it's that similar kind of horror of like the decaying body, the aging process, the problems that come when you refuse to allow death, right? And then it's much more madcap, it's much sillier, like it's much less horror as, I don't even know how you would categorize that, but it's sort of like black comedy, I guess is maybe what you would call it. But what I thought was so interesting is at the end, you have Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn, who have both taken the substance, and they're I don't know how old they would be at this point, in their 60s or 70s, maybe 80s or older. And they still have these sort of young bodies, but they're falling apart. There's like little bits of their skin coming off, like their hair is falling out, and they're trying to kind of make up themselves to look normal. And then they trip. They're going down some stairs, and Goldie Hawn trips on a can of spray paint that they dropped, that they used to cover their skin with. Meryl goes with her, and they explode in just the same way that Monstrous does, onto the sidewalk into many different pieces. And then you see their heads, which are still alive, and they're just like, oh, where did you put the glue? Or whatever. And they're just like, we have to put ourselves back together again. So they don't sort of dissolve into nothingness the way Monstrous does, but it's actually the same plot. And so I don't know, like, I feel like there is so much dreaming in this movie. And in one of the interviews that I looked at, Coralie Fargeat, I think is her name, the director, she talks about how she's like, maybe this movie is the monster. I'm the monster because I'm collaborating like all of these different bits and pieces that I've been inspired by over the years. So I don't know if she was explicitly thinking of Death Becomes Her, but this movie is in many ways Death Becomes Her. Though it's kind of a different movie as well in its ways. So I'm curious if you had thoughts about that movie, because we haven't really talked much about it.
No, yeah, it was interesting to watch it. Like, I think what is so great about The Substance is that it's really clear, like the social critique, the satire, all of that stuff is really, really like, quite clear. I feel like when I watch Death Becomes Her, it's sort of trivializing like a lot of these experiences of like the desperation of like being beautiful and thin and young. It's sort of, I feel like, with Death Becomes Her, which is a great, like, campy, wonderful film in its own right, but like, there's sort of this whole thing of like, oh, these women and their makeup and their whatever. Like, it feels a little bit like, as much as Bruce Willis's character is this like bumbling idiot for most of the film, he is the righteous one at the end. He's makes
the hero. Yeah.
the noble choice at the end, like, I refuse. And it's like, well, of course you do. Like, nobody gives a shit what you look like. You're a guy. There it was just interesting to kind of like notice that it was just like they're villainous. They're the monstrous feminine because they made this choice to try and stay young. Meryl Streep didn't even, like, it wasn't her choice to live as a corpse. Like, he tried to kill her, and because of him, essentially, is why she kills the Goldie Hawn character. By kills, I mean shoots her. She doesn't die. But yeah, I think it's really interesting to consider that because the gaze is obviously really different. Just like thinking about how The Substance is really like, yeah, it's hell to be a woman, and Death Becomes Her is really like, ha ha ha, like these silly little things. And that's where I feel like they kind of diverge, is that you have this one movie that's, I mean, maybe I don't know how it must have felt to see that movie in the 90s, like if people felt that it had similar subversive themes to it, but it certainly feels like it's this fun, campy movie that's sort of talking about how hard it is to be a woman in Hollywood and how aging is scary, but ultimately we're meant to laugh at these women who are, I mean, the actors are being very hilarious, and it's like, it is wonderful in its own right, don't get me wrong, but yeah, I feel like the gaze is really different.
It does feel a lot more misogynistic.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning, Goldie Hawn is fat, like, God forbid,
Oh, God.
in a fat suit and just like, eating ice cream in a disgusting way and just being a disgusting slob who's literally psychotic. Like,
Yeah.
she's watching this TV show where her rival Meryl Streep is killed, and she watches it over and over again and then goes to like a mental hospital. And there's a moment when they're supposed to be in a mental hospital of some kind, or a rehab center or whatever it is. And then the therapist takes Helen aside, and she's just like, you haven't lost a pound of weight and you're failing at this or whatever. I was like, my God, like, therapy in the 90s, what is happening? Like, if that was based on real therapy, which, oh my God, who knows? Who knows, right? But yeah, it was extremely fat phobic, but in a way that was like, I feel like The Substance speaks to the terror of being fat or old or whatever it is because of the pressures in society. Mm-hmm. Whereas, yeah, I agree, in Death Becomes Her, it felt a lot more like they were just making fun of these women, and they were pitted against each other the whole time, mm-hmm. and both trying to manipulate Bruce Willis's character. And then at the end, they're forced to become friends because they have this sort of bond in death or whatever it is. Yeah, I think it is much more so that you're supposed to laugh at them. And I wonder if some of the people who disliked The Substance felt that it was being misogynistic in that way, because again, it does have all of those butt shots and things like that. And there is one way that you can read it where it's just like Elizabeth Sparkle was this idiot, trying too hard to be young, and that was her fatal flaw. Which, yeah, sort of, but I feel like in that movie you can feel so much more of the, made very cartoonish, but the real pressures of, what happens to you at work if you're old or ugly or fat, what kind of power you lose, how people talk to you on the street. Like, there's so many different ways that you can kind of totally see why Elizabeth Sparkle might choose to do this. And what else did she have to live for, right? She didn't have any friends or family or any connection in her life. It was just her work, right? And she was incredibly successful at it. And then she was put out to pasture. Yeah. Which is really unfair, right?
And yeah, and like even that moment of like, you see, I don't know if it's like exactly back-to-back scenes, but the way that the man across the hall treats them both is like, right. There it is like, Elizabeth Sparkle is treated like this old wench, and it's just like, get the fuck out of here. And then Sue, he's like drooling, trying, like wanting to help her, like wanting to do anything for her. And, she's obviously enjoying that because it's like, great, I have some power now. Like, I can get men to do things for me. And whereas Elizabeth Sparkle wouldn't be able to ask that man to do anything for her. He hates her because of how old she is, which is like, she's 50. Like, it's just nuts.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
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 So one thought I had, and I don't know if this necessarily goes anywhere, but I'm sort of curious what you think about it, is the idea of this movie as an afterlife fantasy. That she really died in that car crash and the whole rest of it is just her death fantasy. And I know that the movie was intended to be somewhat dreamlike because there were all those sort of signals of like, okay, there's this huge billboard and it just shows Sue and says new show.
Yeah.
No channel, no time of day, no information about it, right? And there's such a disconnect from reality through the whole thing. Elizabeth's coat was the same color as the substance branding. There were a lot of just these little moments where you're like, this isn't real life. Like, this just doesn't feel real. And then, of course, Monstrous Sue is a nightmare character. And the ending is so, beautiful in a way. Like, when you have this little, it's Elizabeth's face looking actually like a egg with a yolk.
Totally.
Staring up into the sky, having a fantasy of being loved, and then she sort of passes away. Sort of like she finally saw into the light or whatever it was. So I don't know if that's a useful way of looking at it, because it didn't really necessarily seem to go anywhere, but I just thought, what if this was a whole afterlife fantasy? Like, does that change the way we look at it at all?
Interesting. Yeah. Like, what is it all for? I guess maybe it's like a bit of a purgatory that you're talking about, where it's like you have this body and then you're released of it, and you're released of its charms, but also of its horrors. I read all of the like kind of broadness as just a way to kind of narrow the scope of like the world that we don't necessarily need. It's not they're not playing for like realism. They're playing for like, it's very much like, this is satire. This is like, we're just kind of in this almost cartoonish world that really lends itself well to these like themes that, it's like, this is what we're talking about, aging. But yeah, interesting as like a sort of like, what does it mean to age, and like, what does it mean to age, not just in terms of like the body, but what happens to the mind, and when you cling to youth, and, and it's interesting because I feel like you talk to a lot of people, I would say maybe most people in my life at least, it's like nobody would want to go back to high school. Nobody would want to go back to their 20s. I'm like, oh, thank God. Like, I would never want to. I mean, of course, it's like, yeah, it was nice to like, still be much more like physically, in a bit of a different physical place than I am. But like, oh my gosh, I would never want to go back to that time.
I have nightmares sometimes about being back to that place, and I wake up being like, oh, thank God, like,
yeah.
this is not where I am in my life anymore, in so many ways. And I mean, a lot of that is because, you cultivate work that's meaningful to you, and community that matters to you, and, people that love you in whatever way for who you are, and not for what you look like, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess that's a bit of a cheesy way of kind of taking the moral of the story, right? And it's like that part of myself that can handle aging and all of those things. And then sometimes the part of me that can handle that comes out, and it's this really incredibly uncomfortable thing to sit with, of just, that's not what my body used to look like. I'm not used to seeing that wrinkle there, like,
yeah,
whatever it is. And even though, I mean, who wants a super young, hot counselor? Like, it's not really, necessarily useful in my career in any way. And yet, yeah, there's absolutely still that pressure in my 40s. And yeah, that's when this director started conceiving of this idea, was, being in her 40s and kind of noticing a lot of those ideas starting to kind of creep in. Yeah, it's powerful stuff.
Yeah, like because I'm an actor, so I'm in this industry that the very same that Elizabeth Sparkle is in.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's been interesting because I have a very young face. It's feedback that I get a lot, not like, whatever, what does that mean? But I have a face that kind of like looks childlike. And so I often have spent a lot of my career in my 30s getting cast as like 15-year-olds, or getting auditions for like, it'll say in the casting notice, like over 19 to play high school or whatever, because, there's a lot of laws around like working with young people and whatever. So, yeah, I've played a lot of really young people, and it's been interesting because I feel like I'm in this place where I'm like, it doesn't necessarily feel true to me to like play these characters, but then at the same time, I'm like, well, I better hold on to this because like this industry's not very kind to people who age. So there's this kind of like dualism within me that's a bit of the, you know, I've got the Elizabeth Sparkle who's got some knowledge and has lived this life and experiences, you know, the horrors of like being perceived. And then this part of me that's just like, well, you look, you know, your skin looks great. So you better just like do a good job at this audition because you maybe have like 4 years left before they kick you to the curb. So it's like, it's this very scary thing, which is interesting because I feel like a lot of people who sort of in my cohort of actors, like a lot of the roles actually that are cast where I live in Vancouver is, you know, people like 35 and up. Like there's a lot of casting for like sort of mature people who are professionals, like working in a police office or working, you know, as a doctor or whatever. They're and don't get me wrong, there's a ton of like, you gotta look 23, but yeah, there's a lot of people that I know who I feel like start to hit their stride in a bit later, which is kind of like hopeful in a way.
And I love that this was a role for Demi Moore, who's 62, just still being fucking awesome. Like that was an amazing thing that she did at her age, you know. And I feel like thankfully we are in an era where people are creating TV shows and movies and stuff like that do have a little bit of a better range in terms of what age of woman can be cast and what role and things like that. Because it's always been a little bit of, you know, men can be handsome until they're, I don't know, Harrison Ford is still handsome. He's like 80 or something.
Yeah.
You know? Like you see the covers of the men with like their wrinkles almost highlighted.
Yeah.
Because that they look wise and whatever. And the women's faces are airbrushed to the 10s, you know, like absolutely not one single blemish there.
Yeah.
And so it is good to see these roles. And this movie was just so blatant about it. It was just so full on about what all that means. And I personally loved it.
I loved it. I loved it so
Probably
much.
won't watch it again.
Yes, I agree. It's like one of those movies that I'm like, I don't know if I can stomach.
I thought
it again.
about it. I was like, should I watch this again? Because I'm sure there would be interesting things, but I was just like, I can't do it.
Yeah. Maybe need some time before we tackle it again.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Emilee, as always, for sharing your thoughts about The Substance. I really enjoyed being able to work out some of those thoughts and ideas, because some of it I feel like was still percolating inside me, and it's just really helpful to be able to talk about it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I agree. It was so fun.
All right, so thanks again, everybody, for listening to Popcorn Therapy on The Substance. Yes, I am open to your recommendations. If there's something that you want to hear me talk about, you can let me know. You can comment on this episode on Spotify. You can DM me if you want. My Instagram is Julie Peters Wellness, and on TikTok, I'm Popcorn Therapy. You can check out my website as well, juliepeters.ca, if you want to learn more about my counseling practice. I use a lot of tarot in counseling, or you can do tarot on its own. You will hear more about the books that I've been mentioning a little bit. That's coming, and I have several books that you can check out on my website as well and order them wherever you get books. So please feel free to be in touch. It helps a lot if you share this podcast with your friends, if you follow, subscribe, you know, all of those good things, comment. It just helps a lot to get this podcast in front of other people. So I hope you enjoyed that. I would love to know what you think, and we will catch up next time.